and welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, and experience from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and I'm delighted today to have a conversation with Daniel Erasmus. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frits.
Yeah. Now, Daniel, you've been to the show before. So 3-4 years ago, we talked about your work as a scenario planner. So a small recap for the new audience. You are a native from South Africa, but live in the Netherlands. You are a futurist and scenario planner since the 90s. And your work has brought you in contact with all sorts of people, backgrounds from Nobel laureates to investors to sushi masters of the Emperor of Japan. So met a great people. Columnist, writer, and you wrote a book, Innovation from the Edge. Again, as mentioned, we discussed scenario planning, and the reason I wanted to reach out today to you is you started a new initiative, which I would qualify as scenario planning on steroids. We're going to talk about how you're using AI to attack or solve climate change. Again, welcome.
Thank you very much, Fritz. Sorry, my team here. We come from this space to this space for very specific. My background's in engineering. I trained as an engineer back in the day, as well as business, and then focused on decision theory for many years, which I taught at various universities, scenario planning and decision theory. So that kind of cusp of decisions, change, and looking towards the future to understand our context better. And it was very kind to have had the Shell alumni, so particularly Arie de Geus, be a mentor and really guide those processes, as well as the GBN people, Peter Schwartz, Napier Collins, Kees van der Heijden, and they've really been mentors to me through this process. And for 25 years, been leading global scenario processes, which looks anywhere from 5 in telecoms, that's quite a long time, and IT, all the way to 30 years to the future of the world, which we did for the European Union and the French government to really look civilization numerique 30 years into the future. And from 25 years of sitting in the room with some of the smartest people on earth, has been a tremendous lesson. You can see how mistakes are made because we base our actions on perceptions of the future. And you can also see that sometimes you're there and you see this little left-hand scenario. It's like, oh, it's not going to go this way. It's going to go that way. And I would be remiss not to mention something of the legacy from that space, which you've asked me. And, we've been very fortunate to help anticipate the global financial crisis for a bank, which is a set of scenarios which we developed in 2004 till 2006 when they were really finalized. And that allowed that bank to have a very different stance on the crisis going in. It's published in a book. It's publicly available, and that bank had its most profitable year in 150-year existence. They made $2.5 billion profit, one of 2 banks that had asset accumulation in 2008. So we're very happy because our client success are our success. Another one was the oil price collapse for an oil field services company. And again, we helped anticipate that collapse. And, you stand in a room and there's, a few hundred executives in the room, and you say, it might well be, that the oil price goes from, 127 to $27, and for these and these reasons, and, sort of a hushed silence, saying these things which are counterintuitive, counter the signals, counter the rewards in the organization, counter the narratives, counter the actions that people are in a day-to-day, and helping the organization prepare for that, of which they stepped out of that with a $3.5 billion grant. It's a kind of a complex process. And then in COVID, we helped create post-COVID and COVID effect scenarios. And one of the unseen bits was food security in Southern Africa. So the cascade of supply chains as they failed. and we helped set up a program to intervene in that system and change how access to foods and really sponsor foods. And that has done, when I checked last year, so it's probably a bit more now, but 58 million meals was granted to people, and it scaled up in 3 months. It did, you know, 1 million meals in 2020 and then scaled up from there. So those have been, you know, it's not just getting the future right, but it's building action and getting organizations with people with all of the rewards going in the one direction to take novel, unique, and forward-looking action that often have dramatically different rewards, both to society and to the organizations.
Okay. Well, outside then what you've done for food, so I mean, in the 25 years, you've been working for finance institutes, oil companies, telco. So I mean, the big corporates. So what got you into climate change? And and we still need to talk about what you're doing there.
It's so our recognition through all of these discussions is that the truly existential threat facing humanity isn't AGI, so artificial general intelligence, or any of these things. The truly existential threat facing humanity is climate change. And once you've talked to sets of climate change scientists, also through the Club of Rome, as well as you know, early discussions all the way from the 90s, it's been on there, and you know, there's been ample discussions inside oil companies, inside Shell, particularly about these things, and also structuring innovation processes for those transitions there. And so our thinking was, what can we do to apply? Maybe there's one piece that I need to add is we were in the fortunate position that we developed a early AI system which did a large amount of web collections and in the billions of articles, and amassed that as a way of understanding which scenario was going to happen. And it was more of an internal asset, but that asset helps feed, because these are open web collections, is basically the raw material with which one trains large language models, which are the AI systems we're used to these days. And so we said, why don't we apply those article data sets and the capabilities that we've developed in dealing with web scale data sets, so the scale of the web, so web scale data sets, of which there's really maybe a handful of organizations that is focused on that skill set in the world, and apply that to a task-specific model. So not a general model, so AGI, so the general bit, but task-specific, because we believe that there's a tremendous utility and value in focusing on one small thing and, excuse me, and taking that and building capacity there. And if we can build capacity in getting correct, or as close as correct as these models can go, timely, easy knowledge about climate change and actions that we can undertake, and that goes all the way to regulatory, I'll touch on that in a bit, then we can change our delta. And in the end, our delta, so as a society, needs to be faster than the delta of what the climate is changing. That means we can make resilient infrastructure, that we can prepare our social systems. So the entire project was, what can we do to make our delta of change, faster than what the climate is going to change, and the massive effects in this. And we believe that AI can play a unique and incredibly powerful role in this space. And therefore, we developed ClimateGPT as model 1, and we're about to release model 2.
Okay. How personal is this new project?
Well, you know, recent controversies aside, you know, I was struck by a statement that Musk said, Elon Musk, a fellow South African, right? And he said, the statement, he says, you know, what could he do to increase the budget of NASA? You know, this is kind of a fundamental question. So who's developing at space, and what can you do to increase the budget of NASA? And hence, SpaceX, which is a private company, and then obviously the work done in terms of revolutionizing access to orbit and the nearby planets, at least. And so the question for us, the personal question, I've got children, but despite that, as humanity is, we could spend the next few decades working together with very small handful of people in the room and developing breakthroughs as we've done in the past. But in the end, you really want to cast a broader net. And the challenge that we have is, what can I do and what can we do, because it's an organization, to increase the pace of our ability to change, or like we call it, our climate social intelligence. It's not an artificial intelligence project, it's a social intelligence project. How can we make us all together smarter? And one can critique social media, doesn't necessarily make us smarter, or the way the interactions are built on that. But what can we do to make us collectively more climate social intelligence? Because together we're going to have to make cities about how to prepare cities for that. My hometown, Cape Town, won the award for the best water management on Earth by the World Wildlife Foundation, out of, I think, 60 plus cities that applied. And 2 years and 3 months later, it was about to run out of water. So you can go from the best in the world to the taps run dry for a city of millions of people. So we have scary times ahead of us, and early action matters. The Nature article is a bit of work from a few years ago, but says the ratio is between, we spend 1 trillion versus 5 trillion a year. So global economy is around 100 trillion. So it's 1% versus 5% if we delay our action. And smart action matters. If we place solar panels and some more interesting battery technology that are emerging and more robust versus sort of the old avenues, smarter, we can create very, very different energy systems with very different energy footprints versus putting another coal-fired power plant down there, or nuclear energy for that matter. And I do realize that people who love nuclear are going to get emotional now. Yeah. And I'm happy to do that debate.
Okay, now I understand that. Now, before we dive into what you can do with ClimateGPT, just for the people who are not that familiar with artificial intelligence and what a large language model is, can you very briefly give a definition of what is a large language model and what does it do?
So, a large language model is really, I'm going to cut through some of the rhetoric now. So if you've been intimidated by AI, prepare to be, ChatGPT 4 is about as smart as a house cat, and my daughter has a cat. We all love cats, but it's a long way, from 800 million neurons to a human has 86 billion neurons. It's a long, long way. We've got some ways to go. And basically, it's a big statistical process that collects large amounts of sentences, and preferably smart sentences, preferably non-fiction sentences, which is what we focused on. And you take those sentences and you statistically predict what would be the next word in that. And so if you do that at scale, so billions and billions of sentences, what they call build tokens, those are the words, but at that scale, if you collect those things and you add some small bit of randomness to it, you can start to write what a model has seen and before. And it is not necessarily what it's seen. It could be sometimes synthetic data, so it's sort of like what it's seen. So increasingly, that's also the practice in the space. So it uses some synthetic data. And there was a brilliant paper saying textbooks is all we need, and they literally train models on synthetic versions of textbooks. And so essentially, that's what it does. Now, I've explained the mechanics of that. That's less interesting. What is more interesting is the task side of it. So you can take a model and you can say, well, and I'm giving real interactions that people are doing with ClimateGPT is sort of, what are the net zero avenues for this company? And then it will understand that company and it'll put together, here's a set of net zero avenues. Then write a plan of action for this company here on following net zero actions. And so it can list those actions. Which areas are smart areas to intervene? What would that be? Or what are the avenues for the city to reduce its carbon? What are the avenues for data centers to reduce its total carbon and energy consumption? What are the best way to put solar panels on the roof? And what are the smarter ways? It's really that broad. You know, what are the policy avenues for Madagascar to prepare and become climate resilient, or Maldives, or Malaysia, or you know, what are they? Anyway, I'm giving a set of real examples of questions people are asking, and by making it super easy to get a quick factual response on that and give references that will cite those things. What are the livestock? Which livestock is the smartest livestock for climate resilience in the Sahel, which is this region just below the Sahara in Africa that's massively exposed to desertification? And there's the paper. Somebody did the work and said, this livestock is better than those. So you're making climate decisions, climate advice easy, you make climate advice accessible, and you give the references to the best thing. And so the AI is helping us make linkages which we wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
Yeah, okay, and you just want to make that crystal clear to the audience, and that's where the term artificial intelligence comes into play. So it's basically combining and looking at research which a human, somebody's actually already done, and just being able to find that, say, look, hey, this is actually what you should be looking at. So it's not generating new knowledge or new ideas, it's just exposing the knowledge to people who cannot assess all that information which is out there.
The likelihood that you would find the paper that talks about livestock in the Sahel is extremely low.
Yes.
And the likelihood, you know, and the fact that the model can then write that in a sensible reaction doesn't mean all of the model's answers are correct.
Yeah.
Because it's still
right? But that paper needs to exist. It won't be able to write that paper from scratch.
Sometimes it can make inferences on areas which are kind of between papers. It's a bit more nuanced aspect to that. But essentially, what it's doing is, in general AI it's building a statistical model of what would be an expected answer for this. And those answers, one can make, models tend to hallucinate. So sometimes they make up things because they don't have exactly those things. So they put something in the middle, and that something in the middle might be this way or that way, because there is an aspect of randomness to these things to enable them to work. But as these techniques, and there's every day a new technique. So in our case, we added about, as references, about 2 million climate facts to that. And we will be increasing those data sets. And from that, we looked at public data sets. So what the OECD has a climate portal, the World Bank has a climate portal, the IPCC, the Club of Rome, which we signed a partnership building this model for. They just did an Earth for All study, and so there's a broad area of references. Work on that. The World Resources Institute has done work in this space. So all of those sort of trusted resources, we're tying and then linking that into the model to help it be a bit more factual and also task-oriented, because in the end, you want to expose that work and help people click through and work and link to that work and guide them to those trusted sources.
Okay, can you take us on a little bit? You talked about those people. So who is the average user? Which organization do you hope will use this ClimateGPT model?
Let me just kind of in between your questions before we go to the user, just to close the technical side of things. So the model is open. It's open source. It's open access. You have to apply for access as well. You should be a researcher or have a real reason to use that. So we're trying to limit any abuse of this, but it's completely open. It's there. It's available, and more so than that, We published the paper. It's a 50-page paper. It's got the formula of exactly how we built the model, so explaining step by step. It's about 27 people worked on building this model, so directly. And that was fantastic colleagues at Aptec, which is an NLP organization in Germany, associated with Aachen, and as well Germany and Jordan, so actually sort of, and specifically focused on multilingual capabilities, and then also linked to Equity Lab that does model provenance, and absolutely fantastic work that they've done, sort of where the model, how the provenance, what's the lineage of models. And so us worked together, and we had a grant from the UAE Sovereign Fund, which facilitated the building and the compute for that. And so with the first AI, to the best of our knowledge, a major piece, we published a sustainability model. The model was trained on green power, and it's running inference. So if you ask a question, it's also on green power. And we had to find, in the end, a wonderful partner that was delivering GPUs running off hydropower in the northwestern part of the US there. And so we wanted to practice and walk our talk. So it's all available. If you're interested in the technology, the paper is there. And we're the first foundational model to have been built on climate change. And we released a family of models. They're open. So foundational model as well as fine-tuned models. And there are 7 billion, 13 billion, and 70 billion parameter models publicly available.
That's big.
And the second one to come out of Europe or out of the EU, to the best of my knowledge, after Mistral. So the second foundational model. So, you know, in the AI world, it's kind of a, you know, I think, a believer, you know, in our humble ways, a contribution.
Okay. Now, before I go on a segue to what you just shared with me, coming back to my question, who would be the ideal users of technology? We built within the climate space, there's not simply an ideal user. There's a number of things that we need to do within climate. So we need to green the financial system so that our pension funds and all of those rewards match up with our long-term, because we have a lot of liabilities, so long-term liabilities, which are not really currently on the book. And there's fantastic work done by the NGFS, so the Network for Greening the Global Financial System. 127 central banks are working together on setting the rules of the road so the financial system works for a more longer term future. And these are central banks. It's not just some private initiative. It's central banks exercising that and understanding that, matching the currency, you know, as well as banking licenses, pension fund licenses, insurance, licenses. There needs to be an alignment with those investments on long-term, that it reflects long-term liabilities as well as the help with the transition. Then, so there's a tremendous amount of work to be done there. And we're helping facilitate some of those things, but also on the other side, you know, there's policy matters and policy resilience. So post-launch, we've kept it rather open, and there are huge set. I mean, I can go through 100 of those tasks that needs to be done. In the Netherlands, where we currently are, we have to figure out how to raise the dikes, you know, and pay for it. And it's one of the few countries in the world that has multi-generational infrastructure investment. So people invested in the dikes, you know, before us, you know, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and then more, and the upkeep of that. So there's an understanding in the Netherlands of building multi-generational infrastructure and paying for multi-generational infrastructure. Now we're going to have to make climate resilient infrastructure, and the only way we're going to pay for it is with a multi-generational view on that. So those are policy decisions, but there's also engineering decisions, and there's real decisions of, you know, if the oceans go this high, then we've got these things. If the ocean goes that high, it's a whole set of other decisions. And the lesson from the IPCC is every time the IPCC comes out with a report, it says our assessment on the impact of climate change was too conservative. We're seeing things that we didn't expect would happen
until the end of the century, and it's already happening now. And so every time the IPCC is revising its report, and its own scenarios are increasingly reflecting the rapid pace of climate, and we're breaking records again this year.
Okay, question, because I saw on the website in my preparation that ChatGPT also emerges as an AI tool against climate dissemination. Is this about addressing the whole climate deniers discussion or how do you view how ClimateGPT can help there?
Yeah, so getting the best knowledge out there and using AI to help with that doesn't mean it's always correct, doesn't mean it's always 100%, but it's a best effort, and it's the first of a best effort, of where there'll be many more. We partnered with the best thinkers, so the Club of Rome, which made 6 different scenarios of how to intervene to change these things. Getting that best information out there helps structure and inform debates. So it's not for us to go to Twitter and challenge every specific thing, but with these models, you can start to build those things that can start to intervene and ask and say, well, hang on, this is what we're learning from this. Hang on, this is what we're learning from that. Still needs a human to check that and say, is that factual? Is that true? Is it there? If I frame the question slightly differently. But over time, these models are getting better and better and better. And if you get good, old school Enlightenment project, Erasmus, after all, if we get better information there, if we make it accessible and easy for people, and if we're very targeted in how we put this into the world, then and make it useful for people, we'll probably get better decisions. It doesn't address power structures yet in the world, but there are many parties working on this. We're just making one small contribution of many players, and it'll take society's effort to prepare us for the changes, ensure the minimum amount of risks across the whole world, north and south. And remember, a huge amount of the risks, liabilities, and all of those things are borne by the global south, but a huge amount of the financial gains from the economy, which is run on carbon, is in the global north. And so there's a political tension, which is a global tension, and it's quite legitimate tension there.
No, I accept that. I was wondering, do you have any, I would say, sources of inspirations? Where do you draw your inspiration from to make that effort?
Actually, bizarrely enough, increasingly we draw inspiration from the AI. You never think that. It's like, but you start to ask these questions of, we did just example recently, sort of, which are the breakthrough battery technologies that exist? Organize it into a table. Add a column, giving TRL levels, so technology readiness levels. Add a column, expectations of market development. Add a column, materiality. And then suddenly you have a table there, and there's little things here and there that one needs to add the references. So you start to get to a point, this is model 2, so it's not yet available, but it will be soon. But you start to go and you go, this would have taken expensive consultants many hours or days of work if it was, we're doing it, and you can do it in minutes or less than a minute, really. And you can get to this quality of, and there's the hope that builds a rising tide.
Yeah.
And then when a politician says we need to do this, it just makes it that little bit easier for citizens, for journalists, for people to go, hang on, what about this? It's like, I don't know. And then it's not about pointing people where they make mistakes. In this transition to a low carbon economy, we will make many mistakes. In this transition to a low carbon economy, we will try many things. In this transition to a low carbon, we will challenge the nature of civilization itself because of refugees coming, the effects of that, the economic effects. And we will have to really think differently about a great deal of things. But it's the most exciting time because we work on something which helps shape our children's future. And, one would really want to make that a better future. And we do have a better future ahead of us, despite the doom and gloom of this space. We get to solve a set of planetary problems people 100 years ago barely imagined. We get to think in terms that, 1968, when people saw Earth rise and suddenly understood the Earth as a system, Christmas. That was the Christmas gift to the world, which everybody, changed the entire consciousness of the world. This is a new myth. So we get to solve these classes of problems, which will define our age.
Wow. I can imagine it's only great to be part of that drive to find answers. What have been the moments of frustration for you, or the bumpy road? Can you take us through that?
Trying to do anything significant is a really bumpy road. And I remember talking with my old mentor, Ari, and it's like, I don't understand. Why don't they listen to me? And we've got these great insights. And it's like, no, you need to figure out how to tell your story better, and you need to listen better. And it's not that you're wrong and they're right, or you're right and they're wrong. That's not the point. But stories need ground to fall into, and stories need ground which are fertile. You can help with those things. You can show examples of those things. You can work on those things. But doing anything interesting in life is mostly bumps. And here and there, the bump just takes you, and then you fly a little bit, but then you're back to bumps. And have no illusions about that. That's the world we're in. And if you want to change things, that's how it is. If you want to sit in your garden and just, watch the roses grow, that's also fine.
Yeah. Okay. So if you want to change the future, it's going to be bumpy.
It's only bumps.
Hey, Daniel, a couple of questions for you before we have to say goodbye. First of all, are there any lessons learned from this particular project you could apply in other domains?
We've been very inspired and have a tremendous board. And so one of our board members is Brewster Kahle, who created the Internet Archive. And for years, when we've been building this internal technology used in scenario planning, and that's very small groups of people, it's massive decisions, billions of dollars sits underneath it and challenge it, but they tend to be smaller group of people. It says, open up the insights, open up these capabilities. And we say, we don't really know how to do this because the people who are paying the bills, small groups of people, and they're willing to pay the bills. So that's their work, we're doing in as an advisory practice to them. And so one of the exciting lessons is opening up our work. It's open source, it's open access. You just have to apply and then you can use it. And then suddenly a huge amount of people came around and says, how can we help? Everything from central bankers to heads of organizations to CIOs saying, what could we do to help this? This is help pay for things, help pay for GPUs, help power, help, and all of these things. So one of the lessons is the moment you open things up, people tend to lean in and support you. And I would say, if anybody who watches this feel that they in any way can contribute to this, please reach out to us and help. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. And I think the other lesson is it's actually from Danny, who's also on our board. It says, Danny Hillis, and says, pick a really big target, something that you can work for a lifetime. And so this is pick a big goal, not a small goal, but really big goal, and then work, steps towards that. Make it clear so that people understand what you're working for and why you're doing it. We're trying to make the delta of our change faster than the climate. Make it clear the steps that they can do, but pick a big goal. And somehow that focuses the mind.
Okay.
And it focuses the network.
Yeah. Daniel, that's a very nice unexpected segue to my final question for you. And that is, as a futurologist, as a scenario planner, how do you have an idea of your personal future? What's the scenarios you have hopefully we'll meet again in the future, because we haven't finished talking yet. But for now, thank you so much for sharing with us for the brand called You what ClimateGPT is all about and what you're doing and why you're doing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Fritz, and happy to come update when we are releasing Model 2. And thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.